Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin. That's the best New Zealand accent. I'm sorry to anyone who's from New Zealand listening right now.
We just lost all of our listeners in New Zealand.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried that.
The hell's that, mate? You call that a New Zealand accent?
Rewind of the Living Dead.
Rewind of the Living Dead. I love how you're just like, I'm sorry, I fucked that up entirely. Sorry to the country of New Zealand. I did not mean to do that. Damon, and I'm Patrick Guerra, by the way. Damon, I do have to, terrible accents aside, I need to hijack the top of the show because we have important Rewind of the Living Dead news that I have to get out there. My short film, The Path, my horror short, has been selected to screen virtually at Panic Fest. And I have to start off the podcast by imploring our fans, if you're a fan of this show, you can finally see something that old director Patrick said, oh, like, I love horror, and here's what I think about horror. I've put my money where my mouth is. I put a short film out there, and now it is screening virtually at Panic Fest this month. It's going to start screening on the 28th, I believe. You can go to Panic Fest's website, and you can purchase a virtual ticket to watch my short film. It's part of the virtual online block number 2. It's called The Path. It's directed by Patrick Guerra, your favorite Patrick from this particular podcast. So go ahead and please do that. I am going to shamelessly plug until that day comes, and probably after that too, because this is just the first festival that my short film is in. So I had to do that, Damon. I had to hijack the top of the episode just to let people know that my short film is in Panic Fest. I'm very honored. The people at Panic Fest are wonderful. It's sponsored by some very, very serious horror outlets. Maybe one day Rewind of the Living Dead will be focusing on some of this. But for now, yeah, your boy's in a festival with a horror short this time.
Am I allowed to talk about that? I've seen it. Am I allowed to mention this?
Please. I mean, don't give any, you know how I am with spoilers, Damon. Please don't give away any spoilers. But if you've seen it, we haven't even talked about it. I know I sent it to you, but we haven't talked about the path at all.
So for those unaware, Patrick and I have collaborated on scripts before. I've read his work. He's read my work. We've collaborated on stuff. And I've actually I won't say I've been there since the very beginning, but I was there when The Path was just a script and then became a short film. So I was very aware of this, what was happening. And we actually, during filming, we were moving the podcast around because Patrick had a very busy filming schedule and things like that. Obviously, we don't always talk about that on the show, but we were very aware this was happening. And I was very excited to see this short just because I read the script when it was done forever ago, and I gave you notes on it forever ago. We talked about it very openly and privately, and as you were getting ready for the film. So I certainly had no real part in this, but I feel like I've been there kind of since the beginning. And when I sat down and watched it, it was like a proud father watching a son bloom into his full potential. It's great. It's a fantastic short.
Thank you.
I've learned to appreciate horror shorts better from when you and I were collaborating on a short. There was a short, I don't know what you call it, like a contest.
Like a contest, yeah.
Yeah. So submitting short scripts, and you and I were kind of working on a couple of things together. So I was not a big horror short guy, to be honest with you. I'm a big dialogue guy. You know, I'm a Tarantino fan, so of course dialogue's my thing. And so cutting out dialogue to make a 4 or 5 minute short is hard for me. But that was kind of like a learning lesson. And so I kind of got into horror shorts through that. And then reading The Path and seeing it go from script to screen was just an amazing process. And I really, really enjoyed it. It's a really inventive, unique story. The cinematography is great. The delivery is great. I guess I can say surprise. The twists and turns.
There's subversion of expectations, or at least an attempt at that, I hope.
And there is dread. Let me just say the magic word. Patrick's favorite word. There is dread. So yes, and this is not me saying that. I've always told you this, and I'll say this till our dying day, when this podcast is done and we're dead, and someone is torturing us with a puppet. I will never lie to you on this show. If I do not like something, I will tell you I do not like something. I will sit here and I will say, go watch it, man. Go watch it. Support Patrick. And I wouldn't say another word if I didn't like it. but I did like it. So it is
Thank you.
really, really well done. So highly recommend. Yes, Panic Fest. I actually virtually attended Panic Fest last year. It was a really cool experience. I'd never done like a virtual con before. I just couldn't travel. It's in actually Kansas City is where they hold it at.
Correct.
Couldn't travel to Kansas City, so I just did it virtually. It was kind of cool to go into, like, they have like little virtual rooms you can watch films and stuff. And so, yeah, check it out, Panic Fest. When does it starts March? What's the actual date?
It starts the 27th of this actual month, and then I know my film screen's on the 28th, and I think it runs through early April. Like it's like an 8 or 9 day festival. It's horror focused, which was big for me. It is one of the more established horror festivals. It's not just kind of a Johnny Come Lately festival. There's a lot of those. It meant a lot to me that a real horror festival chose me. Also, shout out to Kika Magalhaes, who was the star of The Eyes of My Mother. Her short film is also in there. I got to see it. She sent me her own screener of it. If you haven't seen The Eyes of My Mother, like, holy crap, like, what a great film. And she's the star of that. She's moved on to becoming a filmmaker herself. She's got a short film in there that's action packed and really dreadful as well. It's an exciting time, Damon, because I think for people who have been following this podcast for a long time, you hear us yap about horror all the damn time, and you hear my name, when I tell you my socials, I go, hey, yeah, go find me on Letterboxd and Twitter and TikTok. I'm Director Patrick. And they go, direct what? I direct a lot of things that no one sees or will ever see. It's all like usually under NDAs for corporate. But I do love horror. I wanted to put my money where my mouth is and make a horror short. Believe it or not, I've never really made one. I made a psychological horror a long time ago. I mean, almost 20 years ago. And it was called Let Me Out. And that one, it was like a psychological horror. And I got an award for that too, but I hadn't really dipped my toe in horror. I've never used horror effects. There are horror effects in this movie, Damon. I told you the background saga behind that. I'm not going to get into it here. It was like, I made a horror thing, and that was exciting for me. That was incredibly exciting and humbling because, we have a reputation now. Like it or not, Rewind of the Living Dead has been around, is established. We have thousands and thousands of listeners every month. Thank you all so much. And I'm putting myself out there, and I want you to go and check it out for yourself. Critique me too. Feel free to, email Rot Living Dead and say, hey, Patrick sure is a shit director. For all that horror, boy, he can't make a horror film to save his life. If you go see it and you support it, you've already done me a huge one, honestly. So I'm not looking for praise. I'm putting myself out there, and I want you to check it out. It's very rare that when someone makes a short film, others can see it. It's a film festival like Panic Fest that's willing to put on a virtual festival as well to allow other people to see it. So I was just like, let's rally the troops. Let's rally our Rewind of the Living Dead faithful. Please go get yourself a virtual ticket at Panic Fest and check it out.
It's called The Path. As you said, it's in the online block on Panic Fest, and it starts March. You said 27th? Did I get the date right?
It starts the 27th, and then mine screens the 28th. Yeah.
Okay, so
but
check
it's in short block too. Yeah, virtually.
And we will continue. Sorry if you're annoyed by this, but it's going to continue to happen. We're going to continue to plug this. You can also check out, I will have an article dropping about it on rewindedlivingdead.com. If you're a reader, you can check that out as well over there in the next few days. I'll have something up about it as well over there to kind of hype up and get ready for Panic Fest. So yes, support Patrick, support The Path. And I promise you, this is me, not the guy who made it. This is the guy who just watched it. It's good. I promise you, it's good. It's
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
I joked as we were doing the intro until we're old and getting tortured by puppets, and that's the perfect segue into our review tonight, which is a little movie that is actually coming to Shudder in a few weeks, but it's in limited theatrical release right now. And we were in the middle of our Final Destination franchise review, and we were gonna move on to Final Destination 3, but I kept hearing the buzz about this new movie coming out, and it had an Emmy and Golden Globe winner in John Lithgow and an Oscar winner in Jeffrey Rush. Now, that's a rare thing when you have that much talent packed into one film, but it wasn't like this huge monster release. But I heard some buzz, and Stephen King did a review and said this is one of the best films I've seen all year or the last couple of years or something to that effect. It's called The Rule of Jenny Penn. I was like, all right, I got to at least see this film, see what it's all about. And we decided to give it a review. As I said, I think it's going to end up on Shudder in like 3 weeks. So if you don't see it right now, you'll be able to see it on Shudder in a few weeks. But we saw it theatrically. And yes, tonight, Patrick, we will be reviewing The Rule of Jenny Penn.
The Rule of Jenny Penn, Damon, starring George Hanare as Tony. And as you mentioned, of course, the great Jeffrey Rush as Stephen Mortensen, a.k.a. the Judge. And yes, John Lithgow as Dave Creeley, written by James Ashcroft, Eli Kent, and Owen Marshall, who did the short story, and of course directed by James Ashcroft. And if you're not familiar with the name James Ashcroft, you might be familiar with one of his films. It came out on Netflix a few years ago, 2021, and it's called Coming Home in the Dark. Damon, that movie is heavy. Very heavy. It starts out heavy and it stays heavy. It's a super, super intense film. I wouldn't tell you much else about it other than like, get ready, because it's going to make you feel a lot of things. It really is a truly, truly gut-wrenching, dreadful, dreadful film that's very much grounded in reality. The Rule of Jenny Penn, I had no idea, by the way, that James Ashcroft had directed this. I just went in blind. I just went in, sat down. I go, it's John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush. I'm very curious. This is also a movie that is very much grounded in reality. It's grounded in things that really happen. But what I only knew that after the fact. While you're watching it, it is a movie that makes you think if what you're seeing is really going on, because it deals with aging and it deals with potential for dementia and what the horror of dementia can bring to somebody. The character of Jeffrey Rush is a judge, and he has an episode, and then he ends up having to go, because of his financial situation, to a nursing home, and he is not 100% in his state. I believe he had a stroke, I think was what happened. Yeah. But also it may have affected some of his mental faculties. And while he's there, he becomes the target of a very sadistic resident by the name of Dave Creeley, played by John Lithgow. I won't say much more outside of spoilers. I mean, I think we'll talk about our initial reactions and all of that stuff, but this is a great movie that is like, there's two levels of dread here. One is, here's the reality of getting older. Here's the reality of aging and what that entails and what it's like to very quickly be thrust from a life of, the character of the judge. He's a very smart, sharp guy. And he ends up out of nowhere just thrust into this place where he's basically infantilized, and he's basically treated in a way that he hadn't experienced ever in his life. All of a sudden he's invalid, like almost immediately. The terror of that alone is one thing. Then there's the terror of being tortured by a sadist, essentially, and no one believing you because they think you're a senile old man. And then there is the third layer. This is a bean dip supreme here, Damon. That third layer is his dementia playing tricks on him? Is the effects of his stroke creating hallucinations that he can't quite explain? The layers of that alone on this movie are something that create a very, very dreadful situation out of something that is rather simple and rather easy to digest. But I got to be honest, it kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time.
So you mentioned James Ashcroft's other movie, Coming Home in the Dark. Did you enjoy that movie? You said it's very dark and very I
really liked it because I like depressing, heavy, and dark movies, rough movies.
And that is also based on an Owen Marshall short story. That's actually how they met and became friendly, was he wanted to adapt Coming Home in the Dark, which is an Owen Marshall short story, into the film. And then this is the second time they've collaborated on The Rule of Jenny Penn. So, again, I'm not saying one has to be related to the other, but it kind of shows you the depth of Owen Marshall's writing and how it became kind of a muse of sorts for James Ashcroft to adapt it into a film. The Rule of Jenny Penn, is it a horror film? Yes, it's a horror film. I would say it teeters more on the psychological horror film than a straight up just terrifying horror film. Here's what I'll say about this movie. I sat down, I'll be honest, I didn't really know what to expect. I never saw a trailer. I knew the concept. I heard it had something to do with a guy suffering in an assisted care facility. Now, Patrick, traditionally speaking, I don't have phobias. Like, I don't have a fear of flying. I don't have a fear of spiders. I don't have a fear of clowns. Like, I'm not saying there's something wrong if you do. I'm just saying, me personally, I don't really have those fears. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a fear of public speaking. None of that really gets to me. But if you're going to nail me down on something that I actually am afraid of, and I'll be very seriously honest right now, it's getting old. Getting old terrifies me.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's because, obviously we've all grown up. I'm sure we've all had parents and grandparents who get older. I've witnessed and seen people go through dementia and Alzheimer's. That is the scariest horror film to me personally. Like, that scares the absolute living shit out of me of like that happening. So right away, this film taking place in an assisted care facility where everybody in here is they don't really have all their faculties. That's kind of the place that's the baseline for what we're going into in this film.
Yeah.
That's scary enough in and of itself. And then you deal with this Judge Stephen Mortensen, played by the great Jeffrey Rush. And when you meet him at the beginning of the film, he's literally in the middle of a court case ruling over a jury, over a trial, and that's when he has his stroke. And you see, like, when you first meet him, you realize this guy's a very sharp, in tune, smart guy. But then the stroke hits him, and he's lost part of what made him who he was. Not only that, but physically. It's taken away the use of his legs. His one arm barely works. And then he goes to this assisted care facility where he's not only not in control of his own faculties, but now, as you mentioned, there's the question of mentally, is he all there? Is he seeing things? Is this all actually happening to him? Or is it just in his own head? We're not really sure. And the film does a really good job of not totally letting you know, is this what we're seeing or is it just what he's seeing? And then you deal with the reality of living in one of these facilities. Now, let me be clear about this, because I'm sure someone out there listens to the show who works in an assisted care facility, and they're like, hold on now, this is not a horror show. Like, we very much care about our patients. And I'm sure there are plenty of places that do. But I'm sure we've also heard about the ones who don't. It's like it's literally like a daycare facility. There's a million daycare facilities around the country that treat children great, and they're great for learning and helping your kids. But then you hear about the one horror story, and that's the one that sticks with you. You know what I mean? And we've all heard the horror stories of elderly people being abused in an assisted care facility. Again, I'm not saying it happens all the time. I'm saying it happens, and that's, unfortunately, the reality is that's the one that sticks with you. This hits close to home for that fear, because seeing what these people go through and almost the disbelief that the staff treats them with, they're like, this is happening to me. And they're like, oh, it's not really happening. Calm down. We'll get you your medicine. You'll go to sleep. They placate them in a lot of ways. That is horrifying.
Yeah.
That is horror on a whole other level.
But they also do a good job of like balancing it, so it's like, well, you could understand the perspective of the caregivers too. There's a couple of scenes that set up, the judge, he's a very like commanding guy, really whip smart kind of judge. I think he has a very, very established reputation as somebody who's very smart, very biting, very cutting. So he's sort of trying to like outsmart everybody immediately. Like he's obviously he's very uncomfortable in the situation that he's just been thrust into. And so he kind of pulls rank a little bit. He knows he's smarter than everybody there, and he's kind of playing it a little bit. But also, they allow for just enough leeway. They put in just enough elements to go, well, is that him suffering the effects of his stroke and potential onset of dementia? Are these things going on right now? And that's what the caregivers are reacting to. They keep it ambiguous just enough. I find it really fascinating how in this movie, there's sort of like the caregivers really fade into the background for the most part. Like, and I think that's to put us in the perspective of the judge himself, where he feels like they're never really around enough to like make sure that nothing's happening. Maybe even almost to like a point that it's not truly like realistic. Like, I think there's certain things I don't want to get into because it's kind of spoilery, but there are certain things where you're just like, well, I think like somebody would have picked up on this by now. But it's a premise. It's an idea that they're playing with. And certainly I felt what it did was it allowed us in the audience to really feel like what it was like to be in Stefan's shoes, like to just feel helpless, to be somebody who's so smart and so capable. But now they are almost immediately in a situation where all of that is rendered moot. And they just have to like deal with this onslaught that's coming at them, not just their own health, but the threat of somebody else in their vicinity. I trying to bite my tongue. I really want to get into the character of Dave Creeley. I think that's stuff that's better left for spoilers. But I just felt like put together, and to go back to Coming Home in the Dark, I think that James Ashcroft is a very, very interesting director. I think he's very good at keeping you uncomfortable. And is this the scariest movie I've ever seen? It's not, but it's an incredibly dreadful movie on multiple levels. I wasn't expecting that. And one more thing I'll say, Damon, here, and it's sort of slightly off topic, but not really, is that we now need to really take Shudder, oh hey Shudder, serious Shudder. As a streamer. We need to take them serious as a streamer. Now, thankfully, you and I got into Shudder during the pandemic, and that's what birthed this podcast. We had a horror streamer to just go to and watch stuff, and that was awesome. We got to talk to. We were always grateful. But if you and I are being honest, there was quite a few years there where we went Shudder original. I don't know if I'm going to run out and talk about that. Like, I'll let people just enjoy that. They continually, year over year, are stepping their game up. This is a movie that was perfectly suitable for a theater. And it's going to be, for the most part, it will just be a Shudder original. I happen to know that there's another Shudder original coming that I hope gets a theatrical release, and that's from Justin Powell and David Charbonnier, who are friends of ours and directors of The Boy Behind the Door and The Djinn, two phenomenal movies, two very, very high-level movies. And I believe their next thing may be coming to Shudder. I'm kind of hoping it will be at some point. I don't know for sure, but like they had, Shudder had those films as well. Like that, like they're holding on to really high level stuff. And so now it's like, well, I think Shudder has to be taken very seriously now.
I mean, Shudder co-produced my number one horror film of 2024, Late Night with the Devil. I know you were not a huge fan, but that was my number one horror film of last year.
And a lot of other people's
and Shudder
too.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Shudder's really stepped it up, and they actually did. I was going to write a review, and I just got so busy I never got a chance. They did a really fun horror wrestling movie called Dark Match recently, and I had so much fun. I was like, this was fun. I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed it. It was a blast. They really stepped up their game. Now I'm not going to say
Oddity, right? Wasn't Oddity also a Shudder original? One of my top 10.
Yeah, that was another one from last year that was in my top 10 as well. Yeah, no, they've stepped it up. And listen, when you're getting your feet under you and you're learning what it is to produce and what scripture picking and things like that, of course you're going to have some hits and misses. I mean, look, if I did a deep dive on Netflix, I'd probably find far more movies that I don't like than what I do like of Netflix originals. They're just so big that it's hard to, even really think about that. Shudder is producing probably one of my most anticipated horror films of 2025, which is The Clown in the Cornfield, which is one of my all-time favorite books. And now they're doing the film adaptation. It's coming to it's debuting at South by Southwest. It's debuting at
South by Southwest. Gotcha.
And they're also, it's actually showing at Panic Fest too, by the way. It's debuting. That's right. And they're doing this at Panic Fest, and it actually lands in theaters in May, and of course we will be reviewing that on this podcast. So yeah, but my point is, yeah, Shudder's great, and they really stepped up their game. And this film, I always say this, Patrick, and our listeners probably get sick of me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyways. When you start your movie and you have John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush, I mean, you're already like 10 steps ahead of the competition. You're like that episode of Seinfeld where Jerry tells the story about how he was the fastest kid in his freshman year of high school because he got a head start. No one realized it. That's what you get when you're making a movie and you've got John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush as your two lead stars, you're already ahead in the race. I mean, now, don't get me wrong, you can still make a really terrible movie, and it's actually, I guess you could say, probably worse if you kind of waste their talent. But if you even make a halfway decent movie and you got these two guys in it, it's going to be pretty damn good. This movie is actually really fun, not fun, really enjoyable. Great story, original story. And the performances are off the charts. But right before we get to spoilers, let me lay this out to our listeners real quick here, just so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about with this movie. And this is not a spoiler. This is just kind of give you the tone of this movie. This is a movie that is uncomfortably about bullying, for lack of a better word. This is a movie about bullying. Now, we've all seen those movies. We've all seen those stories and maybe some after-school specials. There was a movie released years ago in 2001, called Bully. And it starred Brad Renfro, Bijou Phillips, Rachel Miner, Nick Stahl, Michael Pitt. And it was based on a true story of these kids who were bullied horribly by this guy, and they got revenge, and they actually hunted him down and killed him. And then all the kids ended up getting caught and going to prison. And the movie, if you've ever seen Bully, it is wildly messed up. It is a wildly messed up movie, completely messed up movie. But you also, you see every facet of that movie because you see these kids absolutely being tortured by this bully, and then their revenge is to literally kill him. So it's like, whoa. And I know this is obviously to a lesser extent, but if you go and watch when you watch Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and there's that really disturbing scene where Sarah Connor's in her room and an orderly comes in and licks her face. One of the scenes that always freaks people out. Or you think about Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, when that guy is talking to Taryn, the one who had a drug problem, and he's like, hey, I got the keys to the medicine cabinet, baby. You know what he's trying to do. And she's like, fuck off. This happens in the world. Obviously, it's an exaggerated story of that, but this is really, when you boil it down, this is a story about bullying and a story about power and who doesn't have power. And that's really at the heart of this film. And yes, it is horrific. And you said dreadful, the word I would use is disturbing. When this was over, I was like, that was one of the most disturbing films I've seen in a long time. And the reason that it's so disturbing, and it's ratcheted up a couple levels in my mind, it's because this could happen, or probably does happen on some level, maybe not to the extent of The Rule of Jenny Penn.
Yeah, we'll find out.
And I've always said movies based in reality could be 100 times scarier than Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, because it can actually happen. This movie could actually happen, and it's disturbing as hell.
And I want to touch on a few more points, and then I promise we'll get into spoilers, folks. Because obviously you can tell that Damon and I are into this movie. You talked about power there really quick. There's a whole class of people who feel incredibly powerless, and that is the elderly and the invalid. Not just any old elderly, because a lot of people, even in their 80s and 90s, are still very much out and about and walking around. But the invalid specifically, elderly invalid, they're sort of put away. They're sort of put off to the side. They're put in a room, and you go just stay over there, and you just stay quiet and you watch television or you listen to music. Like, we're over here doing stuff. So there's that, and that's very grounded in reality. It really is. It's something that I think I think it hits close to home for me, because I watched my dad go through that all the way until he passed away. He got to the point where he could do nothing, and he was this guy. He'd knock the door down and run the room. He was that kind of guy. He was just his chest out, stomping around, kind of guy who held court everywhere he went. And then at the end of his life, he just had to sit silently in a room, pretty much for the last 10 years of his life. That's what he had to go through. That's a difficult and real thing to go through. And you just go, shit, like that hits you on a whole other level, because it's really something that really goes out there. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, Damon, the other points, I completely forgot. I don't remember what they are. That's what happens. That's what happens when you go right off the cuff and you don't take those, you don't write those notes down. That shit happens. But this movie right here, I don't know. It's way too early in the year to say that it would be in my top 10, but it is very well executed. I think it's one of these movies that kind of keeps you guessing all the way to the end, and you're not going to regret checking this one out. You might not be ready to face what this movie presents. I think it's kind of difficult in that respect to go like, oh, like I'm heading towards that part of my life at some point. And so, buckle up. It's not the prettiest ride, but it's to me this I think it's a very effective movie.
And also, I want to mention this real quick before we get into spoilers. I am a massive, massive John Lithgow fan, one of my favorite actors. And one of my favorite performances, probably my favorite performance of John Lithgow, is from when he appeared in Dexter, season 4, playing the Trinity Killer. I'm not going to give spoilers. I'd imagine most people have probably seen Dexter at this point. And if you remember that season, that was probably the best season of that show outside of season 1. And he won an Emmy. He won a Golden Globe. Like, that was just an unbelievable performance. And he was so disturbingly evil in that show, but also like he wore this veneer of a family man, and he was a father and a husband, but it was just all bubbling under the surface that he was this evil serial killer. And I read interviews with John Lithgow where he talks about like sometimes he enjoys playing a villain, and he's like, there's something so deliciously fun about playing a villain. And man, like I know he's getting ready to play Dumbledore in the new Harry Potter thing, which is I think that's a pretty good guy role. But man, like there's nothing like John Lithgow playing a villain. And if you enjoyed him, the sinister, evil nature of that character you saw in Dexter, this is a totally different character, but that just grinning evil that he carried in that role, he carries that same power in this movie, man. It is disturbing. And as I said, it is dreadful, and it will hit close to home. Like I said, if you're like me and you fear of getting old, man, this would hit close. Like as soon as it was over, I'm like, if I ever get here, can you just take me out? Like I don't ever want to be in a home like this. Like I just don't ever allow this to happen. It is it hit me on that level. Like I was like walking out of the theater, I was like, God, like it was a great film. I really enjoyed it. And as you said, I can't say where it's going to sit on my list. It at worst probably get an honorable mention. But I was like, fuck. Like, this is just a really dark, disturbing movie because it could happen. It could absolutely. And it's not even like Silence of the Lambs that could happen. This is like full on. This is like 2 steps away from reality happening. Like, it could happen to anyone.
Oh my God. Damon, I want to talk about this next thing, but I feel like let's just get into spoilers with it. Don't you think?
Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, there is a limited theatrical release out now for The Rule of Jenny Pin. I believe at the very end of March it goes on Shudder, so you're not going to wait very long. This isn't even like Late Night with the Devil and a couple other Shudder movies that went in the theater and you had to wait like a month or two. I think this one actually goes to Shudder at the end of March. So if you aren't catching it in theaters, you can catch it on Shudder really soon. So you could probably tell me and Patrick really enjoyed this film. So The Rule of Jenny Pin. But as of now, we are officially getting into spoilers. So Patrick, I'll turn it over to you. Let's talk everything The Rule of Jenny Pin.
Oh, Damon, where do we begin? I'm going to start with one comparison here, which is, have you seen the movie The Father starring Anthony Hopkins? He won the Oscar for it like not too many years ago.
Yeah, a couple years ago during the pandemic. Yeah, I've seen
it. It's him, it's Olivia Colman, and a couple of others. It's a terrifying movie. It was not intended to be a horror film. But what was so terrifying about that movie was the depiction of dementia, where as that movie progressed, you realized that Anthony Hopkins' character could not trust what he was seeing. He would look and someone would be in that room, and then he would turn and they wouldn't be there. When he would be talking to them and they would not be in the room. Or he would look and turn, and it really got terrifying when he looked and he was talking to Olivia Colman, interacting with her, and he turns around, and in the same clothing is a woman with a completely different face. Like just another, like a whole other woman in the room going, "Dad, what's wrong?" And he's like, "Who are you? Like, who are you? What did you do with my daughter?" Like, the depiction of dementia is utterly terrifying. And that was the first time where I'd really seen it depicted that way. And I was like, oh my God, like No wonder this, and I think everyone was like disappointed that he won the Oscar that year. They wanted like I can't remember. I think it was
Chadwick Boseman. It was Chadwick Boseman who was.
yeah,
It was the year after he passed away, and he was supposed. Everyone thought he was going to win for what was that movie? The musical movie on Netflix.
Yes, yeah, I remember what I know the movie you're talking about. The name escapes me, but
everyone wanted him to win. He ended up getting it, and yeah, no one was happy about that.
it turns out it's a really incredible movie. The father is very incredible. You experience that here with Jeffrey Wright's character, who after his stroke is having trouble orienting himself. First of all,
Jeffrey Rush.
Jeffrey Wright. Jeffrey Wright, another fantastic, should have won an Oscar guy. Oh my! I'll watch anything Jeffrey Wright's in. Jeffrey Rush's character, we'll just call him the judge. I think it's the easiest way to call it. The judge is having trouble getting his bearings, and the world around him is new and different, and there's a lot of noise, and there's moaning, and there's people rambling at him, and all of this stuff. And meanwhile, this guy's so smart and so clever, and then out of nowhere, one night his bunkmate Tony gets a visit, or actually he gets a visit, a very shocking visit rather, from Dave Creeley, one of the other residents. It's John Lithgow. John Lithgow, probably what, about 6'3", 6'4", tall guy, big tall guy. He comes right in and he pours the judge's urine all over him. He's got a little urine cup there, and he pours it all over his crotch and just runs out. And then the judge is wailing like, "This guy assaulted me. I can't believe," and he's creating a scene in the middle of the night. It's like 3, 4 in the morning. And everybody's just like, okay, Mr. Mortensen, we understand you're confused. Everything is new. They're not listening to what is happening with him. But very wisely, Mr. James Ashcroft like weaves in that dementia, weaves in a little bit of like all of a sudden like the judge doesn't quite remember the conversation he just had, or he's in another part of the facility he didn't quite remember. So you don't trust what he saw. You're not quite sure, but he seems determined. He's a smart guy. And he's going, I know it was him. I know it was him. But even he kind of is in the back of his mind going, but am I seeing this incorrectly? And so he has to kind of build a case against Dave Creeley. And I liked that because it kept me on the hook. I mean, Damon, I'm going to be honest with you, pretty much till the end. There was a couple of scenes to me that made it clear Dave Creeley was up to some shit. Because let's be clear now that we're in spoilers. Dave Creeley is a sadist, and Dave Creeley intends to hurt the people in this house, in this home. He pretends to have dementia. He pretends that he is not well mentally, and that he's just as confused as everyone else. And he does it simply to torture and eventually even kill certain people that are in this facility. He's absolutely dastardly. But the ticking clock, Damon, that I love about this movie is that the judge is well aware that his own mental faculties are starting to decline, and rather rapidly. He knows he's smart enough to beat Dave Creeley, but can he do it before he loses his mind? I loved that premise, Damon. I loved the urgency of that. It really made us feel like shit, like he's got to do something. He's the smartest guy here. He could do it. He could actually like upend this guy. Can he do it in time? And there was so much of that back and forth, like, oh man, he's almost got it. Something pulls him back. Oh man, he's got it. He messes something up. Again, he's invalid, right? That half of his body's paralyzed. He has trouble moving. He can barely pick up a cup. You're making it very clear. This is not a guy who can like take on this 6'2", 6'3" guy with all his faculties and all his enough physical ability. Although he's got one little issue there, Damon, doesn't he? This movie keeps you on the hook all the way to the end. I've signed off. I like this movie.
I think what was the hardest part to watch was because when you're dealing with the elderly in this assisted care facility is that everyone in some aspect is an invalid. In the case of the judge, he is wheelchair bound. As you mentioned, half his body's paralyzed and part of his face is paralyzed, but his mind is still mostly there. But again, as you said, even he starts questioning himself because he's not sure what's there. But he's still, again, even at 50% faculties, this guy's really, really smart. We learned that very early on. Like, he's a very, very intelligent guy. And as time passes, he starts to realize, like, I'm not imagining things. This is not my mind playing tricks on me. This is Dave Creeley. And the thing about Dave Creeley, again, he's old. He's not, it's not like he's like, he's not an orderly. He's a young guy just torturing these poor elderly patients. He's an older gentleman himself, but he's able-bodied. And that's the biggest difference, is that he's not wheelchair-bound. He's not, the judge shares a room with a guy named Tony, who is a former rugby player, a very famous rugby player in New Zealand, but his hip has been shattered and his leg is messed up. He can barely walk. So he's not able-bodied either. And so Dave chooses to pick on and bully the people who cannot fight back against him, or he perceives cannot fight back against him physically. He can overpower them physically, even though he himself is not exactly, he's not a spry young man or anything, but he's more able-bodied than the people he's picking on. And that's what bullies do. Bullies don't pick on the people that they think can beat them. Bullies pick on the people they think they can overpower. And that is what Dave Creeley does. And the way he does it is so evil. I mean, it's wildly fucked up. I don't know a better way to say it. Like, you mentioned the first night we see him in the room, he comes over and dumps the bedpan on the judge. And of course, you said the nurses are like, you peed yourself. They don't even contemplate that a guy poured his urine on top of him in the middle of the night. They just think he peed himself. And so they're like, we'll clean you up. We'll get you all better. And he's like, this guy did this. And they're like, no, come on, you peed yourself. I know it's embarrassing, but But then you realize as he comes back, like, he's been torturing Tony for who knows how long. And he comes in and Dave Creeley wears this puppet, and they actually talk about in the film, it's a memory puppet. They actually have a course that they kind of teach with their therapists in the home to use puppets as like a way to maintain memory. Now, I don't know what the scientific study is, if this is true. I have no idea, but that's something you actually see them talk about that in the film when they're talking about it with the judge. They're like, we actually have something here with puppets you could learn. And he's like, that's when it clicks in his head, like what Dave Creeley's doing. But Dave Creeley walks around with this puppet on his hand called Jenny Penn. And the staff treats him and placates him like he's a guy who's dealing with dementia and he's senile. They're like, oh, hello, Jenny Penn. And he's like, hello. They're all just, he's very dismissive. They think he's not all the way there. He's an old man. Of course he can't do this to people. What are you talking about? But the judge knows better. And as you said, the judge is smarter than everyone in the room. And so as time passes, Dave's antagonism continues to ratchet up, and eventually the judge is like, I'm done with this shit. I'm going to get this guy back. And what you learn is, and this, for a moment I thought, is this a supernatural film? It's not, by the way. But you learn that Dave Creeley basically grew up in this home. He was an orderly and then a nurse, and he just basically lived his entire life at this assisted care facility, and then eventually got admitted as a patient in the assisted care facility. And then towards the end of the movie, there's a very key moment. While Dave Creeley has been, for lack of a better word, torturing all these people for all these years and kind of acting as like the head of this assisted care facility, the old man in charge, so to speak, he tells the judge a story. He said, when I was a younger man, I went to a different facility. I picked up an extra shift for overtime, and I went to this place, and I saw you speak. And you were in front of this crowd, and you were commanding the crowd. And they were just living and breathing and dying on your every word. You were so important. Everyone loved you. Everyone bowed to you, worshipped you. And I realized in that moment that I was worthless. Like, I offered nothing. And so when the judge came to this assisted care facility and he was not all the way there, and he was broken down and physically not able to do anything for himself, Dave saw that as an opportunity for revenge. The judge did nothing to him. It wasn't like he sentenced him to prison or something. Like, he did nothing to him, but he was jealous because he lived his entire life just working as like an orderly and a nurse and never really did anything, never went anywhere, never accomplished anything in his own mind. But he saw this judge, this powerful judge, and people just bowed down to him. Man, this guy's a genius. This guy's so smart, and they hung on his every word. And Dave Creeley held on to that jealousy for all those years. And when the judge got there, he's like, I'm getting him back. Even though this judge did nothing to him. And it's just wildly cruel. I mean, it's just wildly cruel, the things he does to this guy. And then, of course, the judge and Tony eventually team up, and they're like, we're going to take this fucker down.
Yeah. I mean, I think to Dave, the judge was his white whale. You know, he was just like, man, this guy, he's my equal. I have higher footing than everybody else in the facility, and I've recognized that my whole life. But deep down, he knew he was kind of pathetic for picking on people that couldn't help themselves. And he was just like, finally, this guy who clearly from afar intimidated him because of his intelligence and his ability to just command respect. He went like, man, I'll never be that guy, because I pick on the little guy. I pick on the guy who can't fight back. And all of a sudden, that white whale comes in the room, and he's like, perfect. That's the target of my ire. Now he's going to see that I'm the powerful one. I'm the smarter one. I have more faculty. I have more power over him. He's never felt that in his life. I'm going to get off on that. And that's what he does. And he attempts to do. The judge tries his damnedest to outsmart him. And it kind of turns into a little bit of like a, I don't know, what would you call it? Like not an adventure movie, but just sort of like a mission. You know, it's like, how do I outsmart this guy with half my body?
Almost like cat and mouse in a way, like a cat and mouse game. Of like
sort of, yeah.
Trying to outsmart the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's kind of like a detective trying to outsmart a killer or something like that. But he knows his clock is ticking. I loved that. And right when you thought he'd get somewhere, all of a sudden his mind really warped or twisted. And then you add in the fact that this guy Dave has probably been killing people at this home for who knows how long. Even probably when he was an orderly and a nurse, he was probably doing it then too. This is how he racks up his bodies. He's essentially a serial killer. That's what he's up to. And in this instance, you see how he goes about that. He takes advantage of the fact that people are not going to think anything if, for instance, a woman wanders off at night and walks into a bog and gets lost and dies of exposure. Well, he facilitates that for her, right? He picked on her. He said, oh, good, I'm going to take her out. You see the process that he does it through. Another guy is, sleeping in bed, and he just walks in there and, he probably just either holds his nose or puts a pillow over his face, takes the pillow off. They don't think anything of an 87-year-old guy who just died in his sleep and stopped breathing. No one thinks anything of it. He has the perfect little pen of victims that he can prey on at all times. So there's that clock that the judge knows is coming, and the judge sees these bodies roll out. He catches on when Dave, I think the woman's name was Madeline, I can't remember. When he catches on that Dave let her out, that she wandered off into the darkness because he let her out. He told her, oh, your family's out there. Just keep walking right there. You'll see them. Because she's one of these people that every time he sat with her, she goes, oh, my family's coming to get me. It's Christmas time. And they're like, no, they're not. They're not coming for you. You just think they are. He took advantage of her, right? So you want the judge to win. You want the judge to solve the case in time. It's very, it's very cat and mouse, as you say. And I really dug that.
And there is one of the other aspects I really enjoyed about this movie is there is a false victory as well, which we talk about is a classic trope in horror films, the false victory. You think you've won, but you really haven't won. And there's a great moment. Like, again, the judge, even at 50%, is still smarter than most everybody. And so he figures out that the one ailment that catches up with Dave is he takes an inhaler. He runs out of breath and he needs an inhaler to catch his breath. And so he finds out, what we find out during the movie is that Dave has kept all of his key cards from all the years he's worked there. So he can access every room, every wing of this facility, even though he shouldn't have access. Because that's another reason why they don't believe Dave. They're like, he couldn't get in here, Dave. Like, he doesn't have access to your wing or your room. Right. There's no way he could get in here. And when you find out that, no, he actually does have access, he has like a master key card that lets him in anywhere. But so at one point, Dave distracts the judge distracts it and goes into Dave's room, and he empties all of his inhalers. And so when Dave gets overexerted and he needs his inhaler, he doesn't have any of it, and he runs back to his room and they're all empty. And at that moment, you're like, they won. They beat Dave. He doesn't have his inhalers. He's going to die. But he doesn't die. And he comes back, and he is a vengeful man, and he comes back for everything. And it's, again, torturing Dave, torturing Tony, torturing the other patients. You're like, God, because when the inhaler scene happened, I was like, oh wow, like they won. Like, and it sounds terrible to say this. I was kind of like, oh man, good God, this guy got what he deserved. Like he tortured these people, and there's actually a really harrowing moment. He's in his room pulling out these inhalers, and they won't work, and he's just like, and nothing's working. You're like, he's finally getting his comeuppance. Like he's finally getting what's coming to him, and then you're like, it's over. But it's not over, and he comes back, and it continues. And when he comes back, he's even more vengeful and even more, determined to torture these poor people. And finally, the ending. I'll just spoil the ending. We're in spoilers. The judge and Tony are finally, we've had enough. We can't do this anymore. And so they lure Dave into a laundry room where Tony would literally hide out just to get away from Dave. Like he would hide in this laundry room and sit sadly by himself in the dark, basically, because it was the only place he could escape Dave's torture. That is just horrific. And they lure him into this room, and when he comes in, the judge basically tackles him and they suffocate him. Tony grabs Dave's legs, and the judge grabs the upper body because, again, he's half paralyzed, and he grabs blankets and pillows and covers it over Dave's face, and they basically smother him to death. And that's the only way they're going to get rid of this guy. It's the only way they can stop it, is to actually kill this guy.
Yeah, they have to do it, and they have to do it as a team. And you know what I appreciated about that moment was that there was not some knockdown, drag-out fight. It was a pure struggle between three very elderly men, right? Like they can't do much. So Dave is chasing down the judge, looking for him because he knows exactly what's going on. And when he gets into that room, the judge is right there, sitting in his chair. So he's like, "Oh, I'm just going to attack him," and Tony is behind the door, and Tony uses what's left of his rugby power to just push Dave over and push him into all those blankets and pillows and stuff, and then the judge gets on top and smothers him as best they can, and they hold him there for their dear life. All three of them have this very sort of calm struggle. It's very strange, and I think like people who are used to like more violent, more action-y horror, they're gonna be like, that's really weird how like kind of quiet and just sort of like intimate this death was. But that's how it would go down. That's why I said very early on in the podcast how grounded this movie is. Even in that last moment, the best they can do is Tony holding on for dear life to Dave's ankles so he can't get up, so he can't overpower them. He's just got to hold his ankles in the air while the judge like slowly suffocates this guy to death. It's going to take them time, and it's going to be slow, and it's going to be arduous for them, and they're going to be near death just trying to do it. And I appreciated that realistic approach to it that I don't know everyone else is going to necessarily appreciate. But I was like, no, that's fitting. There shouldn't be like a rise from the grave here, or Michael Myers moment where he sits up, or the Undertaker moment, or anything like that. I was like, this is how it should go. Like, are we playing this for real? Because the dread to me was grounded in the reality of the situation, and they played it for real. They played it how it should have gone down. And so it's one of those movies where I appreciate that it didn't try to go in some fantastic direction. It just knew how to use realistic elements to their best effect.
And last thing I'll say before we get to categories, the reality of this situation, we talk about, the hardest things to watch in horror, and it's always the powerless people that, to me, are always the hardest to watch when they have something horrible happen to them. You think about when you watch a horror film where a child dies or a child gets tortured, and that's hard to watch because a child is largely powerless. I've said this on the podcast before. It's hard for me to ever watch a movie where a dog gets killed or a dog gets, kicked or that enrages me because I love my dogs. I love pets. Like, you're kicking or wounding a powerless animal, you piece of shit. And the other side of that is elderly people because they can't do that. And again, as we said throughout this podcast, in this particular case, people don't even believe them. They're like, I'm being tortured by this guy. Like, oh, come on now. Come on now. You're imagining things. He can't even get into your room. He's also old and feeble-minded, and they just dismiss him. When in reality, he's the most able-bodied old person in this entire home. It is a hard film to watch at moments, and again, it's kind of like watching kids or watching pets getting hurt, because the elderly, especially in this particular assisted care facility, are unable to really care for themselves. And like, there's just little moments of cruelty where you're like there's a moment where Dave just steals this woman's lunch and he just starts eating her soup, and you're like, that's just so messed up. Like, that's all. Like, it's just little things like that. You're just like, man, like, you're sitting there. I mean, I don't know how you felt about it in the theater. I'm just like, fuck this guy. Like, this is just horrible. Like, little things. Like, it's not, obviously, there's a lot of big things he does as well, but like, just the little things. This older woman sitting there just spooning her soup. He just steals her soup. And I'm like, that's so fucked up.
Yeah, he's a sadist. He's a pure sadist. I do think that James Armstrong really uses, James Ashcroft really uses this template he maximizes this template. He's going, we're in a assisted living facility. These people are suffering dementia. We're going to use the template to its fullest. We're going to show the full breadth of the horror that could be inflicted here without ever going outside the lines. Like, he stays within the parameters of what can be real. And he very wisely uses the element of dementia to add to the sort of like kind of not supernatural, but just sort of the magic, the I don't know. I'm missing words tonight. I'm having my senior moment, but just this ability to kind of have a creative and different and subjective angle to all of that, all of the things that are going on there, but it still fits into the template. It still very much fits into the world that we've been given. It's not some weird left field thing. It makes sense within the world that we're in.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's utterly disturbing, man. And it's just like I said, it's a hard watch. Again, if you have elderly parents or grandparents, there's going to be moments where you're like, this is kind of uneasy for me to watch, and I'll understand it again because this is all ultimately grounded in reality. And it's just, the thing that I'll mention this right before we get to categories. The thing that Dave loves to do is like the ultimate power play over everybody that he tortures in this facility is. He's carrying around this little puppet on his hands with no eyes, which is creepy enough in and of itself. He walks up and he holds it in their face. He says, "Who rules?" And he makes them say Jenny Pin. And then he flips his arm around and shows them his wrist and he says, "Now lick her asshole." I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it is so wildly, and you watch, and James Ashcroft and the cinematography in this film is so diabolical, and I mean that in a good way. He zooms in and watch this poor old man lick the back of John Lithgow's wrist when he says, "Now lick her asshole." I was just like, what in the fuck is going on here? This is so messed up.
Oh, so fucked up. Because the first time you see it, you don't know why it's happening. You don't know why he just showed the guy the back of his wrist and the guy licks it and you're like, what the fuck's going on here? And then the next time you realize it's his power play. It's to let them, it's them bending the knee. They go, you bend the knee, go on, show me who boss is by licking her ass, and you're just like, this is fucking sadistic. This guy is sadistic. And that's the great John Lithgow, obviously, like being able to present sadism in that way, which is truly dreadful. Like you don't get off on it. You don't like this guy. This is not a bad guy that you're going to enjoy. You're going to revile him. He is truly sick.
Yeah, it's a really demented. I mean, it's just demented beyond words. With that being said, Patrick, let's get into some categories. Let's kick things off as we do each and every week here with best performance. And I tell you what, This is actually a very well acted film all the way around. There's not really a bad performance, but it really does kind of come down to a 2-man show. And also, I do want to give credit where credit's due. The man who plays Tony, who is like kind of like the third lead in the movie, George Henare, plays Tony Garfield, the former rugby player. He's kind of like the third lead, but it obviously comes down to Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow, let's be honest. So, Patrick, for you, who gets best performance in The Rule of Jenny Penn? Go ahead and lick that asshole.
well, Jesus Christ, David, I guess I will. No, my best performance had to go to Jeffrey Wright as Stefan, a.k.a. the judge.
Jeffrey Rush.
God, I have it written down as Jeffrey Wright. I'm looking at my notes. Folks, I'm a big fan of Jeffrey Wright.
I am too.
I'm a really big fan of Jeffrey Wright. But thank you for correcting me, Jeffrey Rush. I'm definitely having mental issues today. There's no question about it. Jeffrey Rush, fantastic actor, obviously a very storied career, and he shows it off here in many, many multitudes. When you first see him in that courtroom, he's very powerful, very commanding, and then all of a sudden something is tweaking, something is getting messed up, and you realize, oh no, this guy is going through something right now. And then when he gets to that facility and he's kind of like recovering from his stroke, he is very much somebody who's like, I still have it. I still have my faculties. You're not going to take them from me. I'm not going to be denied. But he's feeling what it's like to be powerless, and we're being put in those shoes. Jeffrey Wright carries us through that. And as his mind is slipping more and more as the movie progresses on, he puts on a really haunting performance. And you talk about this film being disturbing, Damon. It is. It really is, because I think Jeffrey Rush is really showing you just how bad it can get. I mean, I think it is. I think it's an important thing to see. It's a weird thing to say that. It's important to see just what elderly people can go through if they start suffering the effects of dementia. And so, it's weird to say this about like a horror movie that's going to be kind of smaller and go straight to Shudder and all that stuff, that it's important that people see that so they can learn a little bit of empathy. And he presents it in such a way that I think you will really start to understand, like, wow, I need to treat older people, elderly people who are suffering from dementia and mental deficiencies. I need to consider them a little bit more, because he plays it in such an authentic way, in a way that I really felt, and it really got me in the gut, and it really it hurt. I guess is the best way to say it. It really hurt, and it's dreadful, and you don't want that to happen to you, and you combined with all of the elements of this movie, realize just how awful that's going to be. And so my hat's off to Jeffrey Rush. He's rather fantastic.
I do want to say I love Jeffrey Wright also, but I will give credit where credit's due. Jeffrey Rush is incredible. If you look at Jeffrey Rush's IMDb page, he did win an Oscar for his role in Shine, which came out in 96. He won the 97 Oscar for Best Actor. So he's an Oscar winner in this film. When you look at his filmography, year by year, there are definitely years where he had more. I mean, he started Les Mis and Shakespeare in Love. I think he actually got nominated for a couple. I think he's been nominated for a few Oscars. He won 97 for Shine, but he's been nominated 3 or 4 times. When you look at his filmography, I mean, yeah, he has a couple of, randoms in there. He actually did star in a remake that is not super popular, but I love it. The House on Haunted Hill. The remake of the classic Vincent Price movie. He plays the lead in that movie. And I love The House on Haunted Hills. It came out like 99. I adore that movie. I saw that. Famke Janssen, Chris Kattan. I love that movie. Ali Larter actually is in that as well.
Ali Larter.
And Jeffrey Rush. So he actually does have a little bit of a history with horror. But if you look at his filmography, you look at Ned Kelly and Munich, and obviously he did like Pirates of the Caribbean. He did all those movies where he played one of the leads in that movie. But The King's Speech, that's another one. That's another one where he got nominated for. But you look at this guy's filmography. Typically speaking, he's pretty picky and choosy. I guess is what I'm getting at. He doesn't just do everything. Like there's some actors you're like, did you go a day without working in 1998? Like Jesus Christ! Like you were doing a movie like every week. He's not that guy. You look at a lot of years where he's just like one movie, maybe 2 movies. And again, he's been consistently working throughout his career. But like 2019 was when he made his last movie, 2024, 5 years between films before he made The Rule of Jenny Penn. He's one of those guys. So for him to pick this, and choose to do it says a lot about the material. And he absolutely slays it. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful performance. And as I said, when you can get this kind of actor in your film, you're already, it's, you know, to use a baseball analogy, you're already starting like third base, man. Like not starting from the same position as every other movie out there. So for me, and I'm going to do a twofer here. I know I'm cheating, but I'm doing the twofer.
I like it.
I'm also going to talk about my MVP, my most valuable person for this movie, my Ken Foree Banana Hammock MVP award, named after great character actor Ken Foree from the movie From Beyond, where he jumped down a flight of stairs and into a basement wearing nothing more than a thong bikini to kill a creature. If that's not MVP performance, I don't know what is. So my best performance is also my MVP, and that goes to the great John Lithgow. Because as great as Jeffrey Rush is, and he's brilliant in this movie, by the way, you need that sinister counterpart. And John Lithgow is fucking sinister in this movie. He is diabolical. He is evil. And as I said, I loved his performance as a Trinity Killer in Dexter. Now, this is a totally different role, but the diabolical nature of his character is similar. And he's so vile. Like, again, you're talking about an elderly person, and you know, I'm not saying you're rooting for the guy to die, but you're kind of rooting for the guy to die. You're like, this guy needs to get his comeuppance. This guy needs to pay for the torture he's doing to these people. But he is so good. And there are moments when the judge finally has enough of him and he actually smacks him with this cane and he falls over and gets busted up. You realize, like, he's not that able-bodied. Like, he's not he's not a 25-year-old guy. Like, he's an 80-year-old whatever patient too. One thwack with a cane and he's down on the ground holding his eye, crying and screaming for help. So he's not, he's kind of like the classic bully. You know, the old thing your parents say, smack the bully in the mouth, he'll stop bullying you. You realize that even though he is more able-bodied than most of the people in this assisted care facility, he's not, it's not like he's a young man. So they do have a couple of those moments too where he gets smacked in the mouth and cries and calls for help. But he's just so strong in this role, and the script is good, the story's great, but you don't get this movie if you don't have John Lithgow playing the antagonist. You think about, as good as you think about Nick Nolte and movies like Cape Fear. Well, it's not the same movie without Robert De Niro. Actually, I read an interview with John Lithgow, and he was talking about he was the backup for Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. If Anthony Hopkins had turned down the role, he was going to play Hannibal Lecter. And he said in the interview, he's like, there's no way I would have done as well as Anthony Hopkins. You can't do that. And then it was an interview he actually did with Jeffrey Rush, and Jeffrey Rush was like, oh, I think you would have done great. And he's like, no. He's like, Anthony Hopkins embodied that role. Like, as much as I wanted the part, that part belonged to Anthony Hopkins. That's kind of what I'm talking about here. Sure, there's other great actors. You could have found somebody strong in this role, but you do not get this movie. You do not have the outcome of what this movie did without John Lithgow, and that's why I give him best performance, and I also say he's my MVP because he's just so damn good. And this is a totally different movie with somebody else in it.
You got to have a high level actor to perform this, because again, they're also portraying, what it's like to be elderly. So they're like, some elderly actors are just elderly and they're not really acting. They're just trying their best to perform. He's actually turning it up a little bit. He's also very sinister. He's maniacal, and in a way that I think John Lithgow, he has that button he can press when he needs to. And then there's I think it's a tinge of John Lithgow that comes with every role. There's something about him that comes through that is very interesting, that is very captivating. And that rolls kind of right into my MVP. It's not John Lithgow, it is our director, James Ashcroft. And just the coup of getting these two guys, Jeffrey Rush, John Lithgow, in your movie, you're now working on another level. You're working with two very high level actors. They're working within the template, as I was talking about, that James crafted, which is like, we are in this home. These are the limits of these characters. How do we fit inside this box and make something captivating and compelling? And the three of them worked together, and they made magic. They made something very, very interesting. Again, I don't know if this is making my top 10 list this year, but it's a strong, strong outing from James Ashcroft, who made what I consider another fantastic film in Coming Home in the Dark that I implore you to watch, but just be forewarned. There is very disturbing imagery and subject matter in that movie, and it's again very grounded. So that's the kind of thing that can really mess people up. James Ashcroft is a fantastic storyteller, and I think he leveled up from Coming Home in the Dark, which was sort of a straightforward movie. This one added a little touch of magic. I can't wait to see what this guy does next. I'm going to follow him to whatever he does next because he's clearly showing he's got the chops to do it.
And this is also a bit of a magic trick also because remember, this is a low budget horror film. This isn't like they had a huge, this isn't like a $20 million film. I don't know what the budget was. I know I've seen Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow talk about it. They're like, yeah, this was a low budget movie. So to do what you do and pull it off the way they do it in such a small way, it really is a feat. It's an accomplishment. And a lot of that does go to James Ashcroft for pulling this together and actually doing it. And again, somehow getting Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow to do your movie, it's just unbelievable. So yeah, James Ashcroft deserves a whole lot of praise for putting this one together and directing a hell of a movie. Patrick, our next category is senior moments, and there are some really disturbing senior moments in this movie. As I said, it is. I'm being honest. I fear getting old, and so when I watched this, I was like, "Fuck!" I was like, "I do not want to be in this situation." So, Patrick, what was your I would say favorite. That almost sounds sadistic. But
Favorite's weird.
What is your most disturbing senior moment, or however you want to phrase it here?
Yeah, so this movie's kind of unique in that it doesn't really have scares. There's a couple of moments that might get you or something like that. It doesn't have scares, doesn't have a ton of gore, doesn't have a ton of like on-screen physical trauma or anything like that. But there was a couple of moments, and one that really stood out to me was very early on when the judge is sort of experiencing the place as it is, and it's coming at him in all different directions, and all the different residents are rather touched in their own way. At some point, he's like, I just have to get out of this madness. So he finds his way to wheeling himself out into the yard. And there's one of the residents there, and he's sitting there and he's smoking. He's going, you want to have a smoke? And he's grumbling to him. And he's like, Jesus, even outside, I can't get away from the madness of this place. And so he eventually just rolls past him, and he's going, I'm just going to go out into the grass because this guy's grumbly and loud, and I don't want to smoke anyway. I don't want to be by his smoke. So he's sitting there, and then all of a sudden, he hears the guy groaning. He wheels around. The man is on fire. He set himself on fire for smoking. He's probably not allowed to smoke. He probably his family probably snuck some cigarettes in for him or something. That's exactly the reason why. He dropped a cigarette. It lit his vest on fire, and he's watching this guy be burned alive, and the guy's screaming for help, and then the judge is going, help, someone help, and he's going, oh my God. That was like day one or day two of him being in there, the madness of it all. And that had nothing to do with even what he didn't know was coming, which was he didn't know Dave Creeley was coming. He didn't know all the horror that was coming there. That was just horror of just being in that facility.
I mean, and you forgot to mention the guy also had a flask. That's what actually caused.
That's right, because the alcohol. Right? Yeah, the alcohol.
Yeah,
yes,
all spilled on him, and he caught. Yeah, I was like, when that happened, I was like, oh Jesus! I was like, what is going on? This guy just he literally sets himself on fire. It's wildly messed up. So I was almost going to go with the opening scene where the judge has his stroke while he's actually ruling on a case. It's pretty, it's scary because that's what actually happens when you have a stroke. Like you don't realize what's happening, and you just kind of again, every stroke, there's a different levels of strokes, but this one hits the judge pretty hard. And he ends up passing on the courtroom. But I decided not to go with that one. Later in the film, when the judge has kind of had enough and he's like, I can't take this anymore and I can't deal with Dave Creeley. He's torturing me and I'm not going to be able to get him back. And I've had enough. And so he's getting a bath in the bathtub, and the nurse, she forgot a towel. She's like, I gotta go get a towel. And he's like, I'm fine. Go get the towel. And he's sitting in this tub of water. And the judge is like, you know what? I'm done. And he just slowly slips down into the water, and he's basically going to drown himself. He's going to commit suicide. But in that moment, when he first starts taking in the water, he realizes, I don't want to die. I want to live. But because his body is no longer capable of supporting him physically. He can't even lift himself out from being under the water. And so the sheer panic hits him. And the camera view is at the top level of the tub. So you just see his hand struggling and the water splashing. I was like, heart palpitations in that moment. I was like, because he realized, like, at first he's like, I want to die. I don't want to be here anymore. This is too much. But as soon as he goes under the water, he has that moment of clarity. He's like, I don't want to go. I'm not ready. And he tries to pull himself out and he can't. Oh, it's just, oh God. And of course the nurse comes in and saves him. But I mean, it's just like, I'm like, oh my God. Like this, like, imagine the horror of that. Like, you know what I mean? Like the horror of like, you have a second thought about committing suicide, yet he can't even physically pull himself up from a tub of water. Oh, it messed with me so bad.
That's the James Ashcroft touch. And if you once you watch Coming Home in the Dark, which I highly recommend you do, that's what he can do. He can sit you in an uncomfortable position and make you see what it can be like. And in that moment, it was so shockingly real. There was nothing about it that was fantastic. It was literally just factually what you're seeing. And you're just like, damn, that's fucked. That's so fucked. But it's a reality. And I'm sure that there are many people who have faced that particular situation where they made the choice, tried to back out of it and couldn't, you know what I mean? And just by chance, the nurse saves him.
And, you know, it's wild. I didn't think about this. You had your choice, I had my choice. We both picked two moments that had nothing to do with Dave Creeley actually doing. Like, these are two genuinely scary, terrifying moments that just happened to people who are not able to control their facilities. Like I said, the guy was literally just like drinking whiskey and he can't really, his hands are shaking. He spills the whiskey, drops a cigarette, and literally catches himself on fire. And then in the judge's case, like, yes, he decides, he's like, I'm just going to dip myself under the water and just go. But again, moment of clarity. I don't want to go. I'm not ready to die. But he literally cannot physically just pull himself up from a tub of water. It is, and again, those are two of the most disturbing moments in the movie, and they have nothing to do with what Dave Creeley's doing to these poor guys.
Yeah, we haven't even licked asshole yet. We haven't even gotten to that part yet.
We haven't even got to you ruling Jenny Penn. Patrick, next category, can we survive this horror film? My God, this is like the worst. This is the worst scenario of any horror film.
I've never been in a scenario I didn't like more than this one.
I think the only one that's equal is if you go back and listen to our episode of The Descent, because I'm like getting caught in like the tight little hole of like of the tunnel. That would be also equally disturbing. But Patrick, could you survive this horror film?
Damon, it's a tough question because I think you and we come from mixed martial arts backgrounds ourselves, so we have learned how to defend ourselves over the years. We suffer no bullies. I don't think so. I think you and I are both like, yeah, you know what? Like we've both fought guys bigger and smaller than us in our lives, and you're just like, oh, come what may, you know. Like I've prepared as best I can. So when a bully comes at you, you go, well, I'm gonna face him. I may win, I may lose, but I know what I'm doing, so I'm gonna do what I can. In this instance, we're hamstrung. In this instance, we're not the same guys we used to be. You're a little bit more in a Tony situation because you're a big dude. You're 6'3" and pretty powerful guy. You got a wrestling background and stuff. I don't think I would mess with a Damon Martin if I was a smart man. Dave Creeley, probably about your same height. Dave Creeley, long and lanky too. You know what I mean? And you already know that if you've gone toe to toe with a lanky guy, it's difficult. It's actually really hard to fight long limbed guys. It's very tricky. So you have your own particular brand about it. For me, you know, I'm a much smaller guy, but I've very used to fighting bigger guys for over a decade. I would want to fight back, but Damon, imagine just going, and I've done this in jiu-jitsu before, where they're just like, you can't use your left arm. Put it under your belt. I've done it. I've done this before. I put my left arm in my belt because it was like my shoulder was jacked up or something, and I trained jiu-jitsu with just my right arm. I've done that in the past. So if I got a big guy coming at me who has a more physical ability than me, and I don't have the use of, let's say, the left side of my body, I'm going to fight like hell. I may lose, Damon, But I am not licking asshole. Okay, somebody just jumped in my life and they're like, "What am I What am I joining right now?" I'm going to fight till the bitter end. Maybe it means my demise. So the long way around to the short answer is no. I don't survive because I'm going to fight back, and we know Dave Creeley's not going to be cool with that. But that's my particular situation. What about the Damon Martin situation?
Okay, so let me give you two scenarios here. The first scenario is I would not end up in this home. Fuck that, because I've already said just put me out of my misery.
Not an option here, but yes, I understand what you're saying.
That's my first option: is do not put me here. End it. I'm just be done with it. No, I don't. I guess the scenario is like, would you survive in this particular scenario? And again, I don't know what physically ails me. You know, like I said, I'm 6'3", I'm a big guy, but you paralyze me. I've lost my advantage of size and power in that, because much like the judge, like he's a very smart, capable man, but he's now bound to a wheelchair. That takes away a lot of the advantages you may have. So physically, I don't know. Like, what am I stricken with? You know what I mean? Like how my grandfather was the head of security at Goodyear for many, many years. Big guy, football, army, like whatever. And later in his life, he was very, very feeble. He could barely get around the house. And it was tough to watch because this was a very physically capable man for most of his life. And as he got older, he just, again, the body breaks down. I think though mentally, I could never do it. I would just be like, he'd be like, who rules? I'd be like, go fuck yourself, Dave. Like that's maybe
that's a very Damon Martin answer.
Maybe he smothers me. Maybe he just beats me up with Jenny Penn. I have no idea. But he'd be like, who rules? I'm like, you rule my cock. Go right ahead, motherfucker. You're not getting me. You're not ruling none of this. And again, like I said, that might cost me. And like I said, no, I probably don't make it because this guy, clearly he's willing to kill. And like that poor old lady who's just like, my family's coming to get me. He's like, oh, they're outside. And she literally wanders into a marsh and drowns.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not making out here because I will not let Jenny Penn and her asshole are going away. I'm not licking anything. So
there will be no licking.
There will be no licking. I'm not going to make it. So no, I can't survive this horror film because
that's the title of this particular episode. There will be no licking.
You're not licking the asshole. No, I'm not making it. So I can be honest about that.
We both don't make it out of this one.
No, I know. And like I said, I would love to believe that I would be the judge and Tony, like tackling Dave, and like, who knows? Like I said, I have no idea what the physical ailments are going to be. So that's what's terrifying, right? Like we're both very physically capable guys. That's terrifying to me. Like having that taken away from you. Oh God, it's just, scares the shit out of me. Patrick, next category, remake, sequel, or leave it alone. Pretty self-explanatory category, but this is the category we take whatever movie we're reviewing and we say, should they remake it, should they sequelize it, or should they leave it alone? Patrick, for The Rule of Jenny Penn, remake, sequel, or leave it alone?
I think it's safe to say that we can leave this one alone. When I think about James Ashcroft's other work, Coming Home in the Dark, you don't need a sequel or follow up to that, and once you watch it, you'll understand why. I think this is another one that does it. It makes its statement. It doesn't require follow up. They get their comeuppance. They beat Dave Creeley. I don't need to see a return of this or anything like that. I don't need an American remake like we got with Speak No Evil, which is essentially a movie. This movie is completely in English, by the way. There's no subtitles or anything like that, and the accents aren't even that hard to follow, truth be told. John Lithgow does a slightly better New Zealand accent than Damon Martin, but otherwise you understand everything they're saying, so we don't need like an American version of this, but boy, don't be surprised if one comes. Don't be surprised if Blumhouse is like, oh, we can do that. Gird your loins, folks, because we may be licking Blumhouse asshole by the end of this. Please, just leave it alone. It's good as it stands.
Yeah, this one, like, it's leave it alone is the answer, and now you've just terrified me that they are going to try to remake this. And I'm only hoping because they actually had Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow in this movie, like named award-winning actors, that they're not going to be like, because listen, when they were doing Speak No Evil, the one positive of the whole thing was, well, you got James McAvoy.
Yeah.
James McAvoy is incredible. Now I'm not, Scoot McNairy and Mackenzie
Davis, I believe.
Davis, thank you. Mackenzie Davis. Yeah. Loved him. I'm not saying they're great. I'm actually a big Mackenzie Davis fan. But James McAvoy, I was like, all right, you got me. Like, I'm not saying you should make this or you should remake it or should touch it, but James McAvoy is pretty awesome. And the original Speak No Evil was characters, people you never heard of before, like actors that were just kind of unknown. They were from whatever, Norway or wherever the film was made. They were not known quantities in America. That one, I was like, all right, James. And again, they got a lot right in that movie. Not to get back to our review of Speak No Evil, James McAvoy was great. This movie, you got an Oscar winner in Jeffrey Rush, an Oscar nominee in John Lithgow, and a multi-time Emmy and Golden Globe winner in John Lithgow. Don't fuck with it. We don't need the Blumhouse remake, okay?
It's coming now. Now I realize it's coming. I cursed that.
You've cursed it now. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know who you get, like, because that's my point. Like with James McAvoy, like you can
Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. Why not?
I mean, I'll watch those guys do anything.
You're going to watch it, aren't you, right? You're going to go, well, what can they do better? Oh, how about Al Pacino and Robert De Niro? You go, fuck, okay, fine, I will watch it. And then we'll review it next year.
They're going to get Joe Pesci to come out of retirement. He's like, who rules? Who rules? Jenny Pitt, you motherfucker, you.
Lick the asshole, you motherfucker.
Yeah, lick the asshole, you motherfucker, you. Or like, I'm here to amuse you. I'm here to amuse you with Jenny Pitt.
Think I'm funny?
Yeah. Let's hope that doesn't happen. So no, it is Leave It Alone. Don't remake this. It is a great film and great performances and known actors, so we don't need another one.
Please.
That's going to be my torture. I'm having nightmares tonight. Blumhouse, what's going on?
Blumhouse. You just wake up with sweat on your face.
Final category, Patrick. Is it scary? So when it comes to the rule of Jenny Penn, is this film scary?
Yeah, Damon, it is scary, and not for the typical reasons. It is. I find this to be a very dreadful movie, actually, and right from the jump, and pretty much all the way through, I think you're dealing with dread on a different level, on a very realistic level, which to me is actually can be worse sometimes. Honestly, it can be a lot worse than just like some sort of crazed killer or a supernatural being. This is something that is probably going to happen to us if we meet old age at some point. So you're facing down a real, true reality that's coming for you that you cannot escape. So yeah, it's scary. It's dreadful for those reasons. You know, it's not a typical horror movie. It's not going to keep me up at night. Although when I think about it deeply, it might, because it's much more true to what is likely going to be down the line for me. If I'm lucky enough to get to old age, I think at some point I will lose my faculties. I will lose physical ability. All of these things, these are all real things. They're portrayed in a way in this movie that is not just horrific, but very much realistic, like you're like, damn, like this, yeah, all of this could happen.
I always talk about scary. The word scary can encompass a lot when it comes to horror. And my word for this movie, I used it earlier, I'll use it again now. This movie is utterly disturbing. Yeah. Unbelievably disturbing. And that's scary on a different level. And like you said, when it can really happen. And you mentioned, like, you can't escape this. This isn't Michael Myers chase you down a hallway. This isn't Freddy Krueger in your dreams. That's as much as we enjoy those films, we know those can't happen. This could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And probably does. Some version of this probably is taking place in an elderly care facility somewhere across the world right now. I don't know. I never found an interview where Owen Marshall talked about his inspiration for writing this, but my God, he's got to have it from somewhere. And sadly, if you peruse enough newspapers and articles, you'll find something similar to this of horrific things that are carried out in assistive care facilities. So yeah, this is a disturbing and terrifying movie in another way. Like I said, especially if you're like me and you fear getting older, man, this is like the fear of God is in you. Like, I do not ever want to end up in this situation. Yeah. And again, you can't, that's the roll of the dice the human body has. You can't tell. So yeah, it is. It's terrifying in that way. It's disturbing as hell, and it's a vile movie. And when I mean vile, I mean that in a complimentary way. Like, it's a vile, like it's a disturbing, messed up movie, and it's all based in reality. And when I walked out of that theater, I was just like, it took me a minute. I sat in my car and I was like, fuck, like that was just messed up. on a lot of levels, it was messed up. And so, yeah. And like I said, if you can't make it to the theater, we always champion the theater experience on this show. But I understand this is kind of a very limited release. If you can't make it or you're just not seeing showings, that's fine. Shudder's going to get it in a few weeks. I think it's the very end of March it comes out. Right around the time you can also check out The Path at Panic Fest by the great Patrick Guerra. So, yeah, if you can't see it now, you can kind of tell we really enjoyed this film. Watch it. It will mess with you. Especially if you have any kind, especially if you know anyone who's older, you get fear of getting older, whatever it is, this movie will mess with you.
Oh, it will. It definitely will. It's sticking with me right now. I can tell you that.
Yeah. So please, if you ever hear me going to an assistant kid, just put me out of my misery. That's all I'm saying. Folks, that's our episode. We want to say a big thank you as always, to everyone that tunes in the show. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on YouTube. Again, even if you don't watch us on YouTube, just subscribe. It really does help with our numbers, our views, and, of course, our availability and search results and things like that. So please, if you can, like us and subscribe to us over there, even if you don't watch us on YouTube. And, of course, you can also check us out over on our website, rewindofthelivingdead.com, where we do post a podcast. We also post things like the new Last of Us trailer. That was pretty awesome. And other reviews of movies that we don't get to on the show. So check that out as well. You got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up on email anytime. rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or find us on social media. We are on Twitter/X, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. We love to hear from you guys or follow along. We post clips from the show, graphics, all kinds of good stuff. So follow us on any of your favorite social media platforms. We are on there constantly, and we always try as best we can to respond to your messages. So please hit us up anytime there. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And as always, I want to say a big thank you to everyone that tunes in the show. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.